In this video, we're going to be going over the PBR workflow, and PBR stands for physically based rendering. And you can really just think of this as a more photorealistic way of lighting your scene, most likely in a game engine. And realistically, this is going to be more mathematically accurate and just overall a faster approach to lighting in your scene as opposed to previous ways that it's been done. So you can really just think of this as a way for the game engine to treat lighting how it would actually be treated in the real world. So the easiest way I can kind of explain this is just by showing you an example. So this right here is one of the assets that kind of ships with Unity, and if we move this around, you can see that it's reflecting in different ways, and it just overall looks a little bit more unique to previous ways that we've made assets. So let's go ahead and kind of dissect this and see what it's kind of made of. So I'm just going to turn all of these guys off and just leave this one on. So this guy right here, it just says chess instead of chess. It's probably just a typo on the people who made its end. But regardless, over here, we're used to seeing these effectors now. These are just ways of kind of changing things. So if we look at this little image right here, it's like a little round sphere of Mona Lisa. But what this is just an image that's dragged into the material. So over here is this effector, and normally if we have a diffuse, so we go to basic channels, there's this diffuse amount, and that is normally what happens when you apply texture. It just defaults to that. But if we look at this one, it says Unity Albedo. So realistically, you can think of an albedo map as a diffuse map, but they kind of pull out all the lighting. So if I look at just this texture, kind of what's happening here is we have this little strap. It's like a metal strap with little gold rivets that is just painted on here. So detail wise, we don't really have any shadows going on here at all. It's just the overall, if the scene was perfectly lit and there was no actual direct light or anything, what would the true color of the asset be? So again, a little bit different than a diffuse, but again, that's just called an albedo map. So this next little guy I'm going to turn on is just a mask. We'll kind of go over that later, but it needs to be on for the other materials to work. So the next one that we'll go ahead and take a look at is this little guy right here, chest_normal is the name of the image, and it's set to Unity normal. So I'll explain why this says Unity in a little bit, but it's just a normal map. So if we turn that on and then look at the scene, and you'll see things kind of flicker a little bit when I turn stuff on. It might take a second for it to catch up, because again, it's when it says Unity, it's trying to simulate a game engine, and again, Modo isn't a game engine, so sometimes it does a little bit of weird flickering and stuff as it kind of calibrates itself. So if I turn the albedo off and have just a normal map on, you can see that it kind of turned gray, and now it's how it should be. What this normal map is doing, and we'll go over normal maps in more detail later in the semester, is this normal map is making it look like there's more complicated geometry here than is actually here. So if I go to polygon mode, I can grab this polygon. This is just one single polygon, but the normal map, what it does is it'll make it look like there's a little tiny button coming out here. So again, if I look at it from the side, there's really nothing there. But if I was to adjust my light slightly, so let's just turn the light on and off, or if I was to rotate it, what's going to happen is it's going to kind of play with this light. So right now you can kind of see this. My light is up here kind of shining down, so it's giving this little button a highlight right here and a shadow right here. So let's go to perspective, light, directional light. I'm just going to make this kind of be coming up from the bottom. Go back to perspective. So now again, my camera's right back to where it was, but now the light is shining down here. There's a shadow right here, because it's trying to simulate the fact that there's extra geometry when there really isn't. It's just giving you like micro level detail almost. So I'm going to hit the undo button a couple times and get my light back to where it was. There we go. Now it's right back to where it was, and you can see that the highlight on it shifted. So I'm going to hit the U key to kind of unhide and show everything on this chest again. Let's go back to our shading tree, and the normal map is the only one on. We'll turn the albedo on. And again, the albedo is kind of like the diffuse. So now we kind of have both working hand in hand. So again, if I turn that normal map off, you can see everything gets a little bit flat and the lighting gets a little bit weird overall. Another thing you'll see that my camera occasionally chugs a little bit because again, it's processing a little bit more when it's trying to pretend that it's a game engine. So I turn the normal map back on, and again, just comparing that on and off, you're seeing a difference here of how like the surface is shaded. So the next map that I'm going to turn on is going to be the ambient occlusion map. So this is one that we kind of know how this one works already. We've already figured out how to bake these. So that little guy is right here, chess_mag, and then it's just set to Unity ambient occlusion. So let's just go ahead and turn that one on. So now, I'm not sure how noticeable this is, so we'll turn it on and off a few times. So off and then on. So what this is doing is, we're pretending like there's a strap here. There's not really a strap there in Geo, just the normal map kind of pulls it out in a sense. And then our ambient occlusion map makes it kind of dark right here as well. So if I turn this on and off, you'll be able to see it. And that just gives that a little bit more of the illusion that it's being pulled out. So if we look at just the ambient occlusion map, so I'll turn these off, this ambient occlusion, let's actually just set this to Unity albedo just so we can kind of see exactly what this is. It's kind of using the normal map at the same time, but it still calculates that yes, there was kind of a quote-unquote button here, so there's going to be shading where this button would be on this metal part of the chest. This is the leather strap that goes over, so again, where the leather strap touches the wood, there's going to be a little bit of shadow there. And again, this lock mechanism is showing you the same thing. This is where the key would go, and then the more intricate detail. So again, we just have a little bit more complicated maps happening. So let's change this back to ambient occlusion. Turn on our normal map, turn on our albedo, and these are kind of 3 maps working at once. So again, you can see how the complication is kind of stacking slowly but surely with each new texture that we add. And the other thing I just want to note is, again, like this Unity, or I'm sorry, switch it to a Unity albedo. This AO map right here, this is just a black and white image that gets dragged into Modo and then is set to, instead of it being a black and white image, it's set to an ambient occlusion. So again, there's just multiple textures inside of this one file, whereas normally we just have one mesh with one diffuse map that we put it on and call it good. In this case, you can see that we're stacking multiple images into one material. So we have our albedo map or our color map turned on, our normal map, or a map that makes it look like there's more geometry or more detail than is actually in the geometry, is on. Our ambient occlusion is on. We know what that is. And the mask, I haven't gone over that yet, but I will in a little bit. It just makes more sense to do that one last. So this next map that we're going to go over, this is going to be a brand new map. And this is a smoothness or a gloss map. So let's go ahead and turn that on. And you can probably see what just happened. So now what's happening is these gray straps, you can think of these as metal. Obviously the brown is wood, and the darker brown is a leather color. So what the smoothness or the gloss map is doing, that's this guy right here, it's set to a Unity smoothness. This one is saying how smooth or almost shiny the surface is. It's not really saying that it's shiny as in like it's glowing. It's just, if you think of like a pop can, is the micro surface detail of it is really, really smooth, so it's going to reflect some light, as opposed to something like a smooth stone that you pick up off the ground. It might feel really smooth, kind of like the pop can, but the surface level detail of it, it's just a little bit porous, so it kind of diffuses the light and it just seems overall not as shiny. So looking back at our model, like these little rivets, they're going to probably be the shiniest thing on here. They're like, let's say they're made out of brass and it's kind of machined or stamped. So it's going to be really smooth so you can see it reflecting the light. But then this strap right here, the metal strap, it has the darker areas that are probably a little bit more porous or dirty, and then it has these lighter areas that are a little bit more clean. So if I look at it from a straight shot, the diffuse color isn't really all that different, but the shininess value is going to be different. So again, if you get a random piece of metal, there's going to be like a rough metal like this, it's like iron or something like that. There's going to be some smooth spots, and then there's going to be some rough spots. So let's go ahead and look at this smoothness map as if it were a diffuse map or an albedo. So we'll just go recent and change it to a unity albedo. So the smoothness map, kind of what we can see here is the white areas are the areas closer to white. White equals shiny or smooth or glossy. Black, so let's say the wood areas are a little bit closer to black, or even these edge corners right here or right in here is really black. This is going to be areas that aren't very smooth overall. So it could be something like this area right here. All this stuff could be like a combination of dirt. If dirt is on a surface, it's not going to be really shiny anymore. So if you had a mirror and it was covered, just completely covered in dust, or if you looked at the surface of the mirror, you could barely see yourself, technically the surface of the mirror is still really, really smooth, but it has that dust on it, so it's kind of interfering. So one of these smoothness or gloss maps can be fairly complex as far as creating it goes. It might even be more complex than your actual diffuse map, but the whole thing is in black and white. So this area over here, maybe this area was just a rough, like an unfinished part of metal, or it was potentially even a dirtier spot of metal. So again, we're getting these dark areas, we're getting these light areas, there's a lot of stuff going on. As far as these rivets go, they're all pretty consistent all the way through here. There's no dust or grime on them or anything. If we wanted to, let's say this was a black and white image inside of Photoshop, we could paint a little bit of grime on top of this, so just get like a dark gray color, maybe like a grunge brush, and just sprinkle it over the top of just this area right here. And then when this was set back to a smoothness map, what would happen is it'd look like maybe there was some fingerprints or a little bit of dirt got on there, because it's not going to be as shiny anymore. So zooming out and looking at this as a whole, it looks like I actually made a bit of a mistake. I was saying that this right here was metal. It's actually the leather straps. So again, similar scenario here. There's going to be another map that differentiates the metal from the non-metal. But regardless, the surface detail of this, looking at this, it makes a little bit more sense that this was the part of the leather that got folded over this area and kind of pinched again and again and again. So this area is going to be a little bit more rough or kind of messed up, because again, leather is made out of effectively animal skin, and if you stretch it and pull it and move it a bunch, it's going to be not as smooth as the area that doesn't really see as much action, or whatever you want to call it. But overall, just looking at this as a black and white map, we can see that kind of the darker areas like the wood equals kind of not shiny, and then the more lighter areas equals more shiny. But again, we're not seeing very much, if at all, any pure white or pure black. Maybe right here is some pure black, and this is where there's kind of a crack in the wood. So again, there's not going to be any reflectivity because it's kind of trying to simulate a hole. So let's go ahead and just bring this map type back to what it was. So this was set to albedo. We'll set it back to a unity smoothness. And now this is kind of back to where we had it. So depending on how I play with the light, again, remember my light is kind of up here shining down. So if I get kind of a glancing angle at that, something like this, all the shiny bits are going to come from that light, shine down, and reflect back at me. So again, we can just see how the light plays off this surface. And again, a lot more realistic and kind of cool looking, I guess you could say, than our other previous models that we've made that have been kind of diffuse only. So this next map that we're going to deal with is the one that I kind of hinted at already. And this one is going to be the metallic map, or the metal map. And what this one does is it kind of differentiates and says that these, so the little straps are made of metal, the little rivets are made of metal, the leather and the wood is not made of metal, and then these clasps and then this lock are going to be made of metal. So let's go ahead and turn that one on and see what happens. So instantly the metal areas just got quite a bit darker. So that's going to be this map right here. It's still called chest mag, but set to Unity metallic. So let's go ahead, turn that off, turn it back on. So you can see the metal is getting a little bit darker. If I go over here, then it's going to get a little bit lighter because again, it's reflecting light. So if we were to look at this map, let's go ahead and turn these three off, change this one to a Unity albedo. This map is going to be pretty straightforward. These areas that are closer to black equal not metal, and then these areas closer to white equal metal. So this is almost like a Boolean of on off, but you can also notice that this guy right here, it's not set to 100% black, and there's a little bit of reasoning behind that, but you can usually just assume that black or near black equals not metal, white equals on, so white equals yes, it's metal. So that's not to say that you wouldn't have any gray areas in between, because technically, let's say there's a little bit of mud splattered right in this little area right here. Mud is not metal, so you could have this little area right here be a little bit more of a dark area. If it was all the way black, you could think of that as maybe being like a thick piece of mud that you can't see through. But if it was more of a gray, you could say, okay, that's not technically half metal, it's just a thin layer of mud or grunge or something over top of the metal, so it's kind of hindering how kind of shiny or metallic that substance is. So again, usually your metal maps can be pretty easy, but sometimes they can be as complicated as the gloss maps or the smoothness maps, because you might have a bunch of layers of stuff on whatever you're making. So a little bit weird. Set that back to metallic. Let's turn these three back on. So these next two maps, I'm not really going to have you guys worry about too much. They are these two right here. They're detail albedo and detail underscore normal. So these are set to detail albedo and detail normal. So what you can think of these as, let's go ahead and zoom right into this, is the albedo maps. We're looking at just the wood. So if I turn on detail albedo, it's very, very subtle. If I toggle this on and off, let's actually focus right in on this piece of wood right here. You can see as I'm turning this on, now it's off, on, off, on, there's these little striations in the wood. And this is just kind of a surface detail level thing, just to make it look a little bit more fancy. And same thing with the normal map. Let's go over where there's a little bit of metal and a little bit of wood. Turn this on and off. You can definitely see it more in the wood here. Actually, that's what the mask is doing. Sorry about that. So this normal map is saying that the surface detail of this wood is kind of really noisy. So turning that on and off, you can see that wood grain detail being shown. And again, the diffuse does the same thing. So when the two get kind of combined together, this is before, this is after, it just feels closer to wood. So just a really quick explanation of these. These aren't detail maps, aren't something I'm going to want you guys to make at all in any of your projects. But these, if I click on the actual image itself, down here it says horizontal wrap, vertical wrap set to 15. So this is just a tileable texture of a normal map and a diffuse map that has these little striations of wood in them. So you can think of this as just a little cross section of an image. Let's just pretend it's this big. It just has little wavy lines left and right. And then it repeats over and over again. So it repeats 15 times. So it would be 1, 2, and the same thing would go across over and over again. And it repeats over and over again is because we don't want a big, huge image that has a bunch of little tiny lines going back and forth. We're going to have a small image that has a handful of tiny lines and then that thing gets tiled over and over and over again. So up 15 times and over 15 times. That's why this is set to 1515. So again, these detail maps, they're almost always tileable textures. A bunch of games like The Witcher uses them, for example, on their finer tune or finer detail patterns, like all of their clothing and then wood and just a bunch of stuff. But it just gives you fine, like micro level detail without having to have it in your normal diffuse map or your normal map. And last but not least, just getting back to this guy, this is the detail underscore mask. And if I go ahead and set this to albedo, what this is again, white equals on, black equals off. It's just saying that this detail mask, the white areas, the detail albedo normal are just for the wood. So the white areas equal wood, the black areas equal not wood. So don't display this detail. So again, you can see the detail map in the leather strap here. And then I do that and it turns it off. So if I turn this detail mask off with these two guys on, you can see now there's the wood pattern in the leather, the wood pattern in the metal, and we really don't want this. So this mask is effectively hiding it and saying, no, don't do that fancy thing in those areas. So again, we'll get to an area where we can see some metal, we can see some wood, we can see some leather, and turning that on and off. It's not affecting this area whatsoever, it's just turning it off in these areas right here. So again, just another texture to add to the big list of textures that we use nowadays. It just makes things more complicated, but you get more control over what you're doing. So there's a few more things we need to take into consideration when using this process. And again, this is a Modo specific scenario. So again, all these textures could go inside of Unity or Unreal or something like that. That doesn't really change. But in order for us to make Modo, a non-game engine, feel like a game engine, there's a handful of things that we have to do. So the first one you might have not even noticed, but I did mention a little bit, is up here. Normally we're set to default. If we want textures, maybe set to texture. If we want just flat textures and no shading, shaded texture if we do want that shading. And then shaded if we want no textures visible and just the polygons visible. But what we currently have it set to is advanced. In this one, depending on what computer you're using, setting it to advanced might be a bit of a nightmare, because if you have a slower computer or a computer that has a video card that really doesn't like this system where it's pretending like it's a video game when it's really not, your computer overall, it's just going to feel really slow. You're going to go to rotate and it's going to chug, 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 chug. When you go to rotate things, it might even crash. It might even not display this viewport at all. It might be kind of like a garbly-gook weird scenario where it just looks like an error is happening. And that's potentially something that's going to happen. But again, it depends. Usually computers that people have nowadays, it's not really an issue. But I've had people in other classes that have had problems with using this advanced viewport. So again, if I was to change this to default, what you're going to see is a bunch of weird stuff happening, because realistically, normal Modo doesn't know how to handle game engine stuff. So it displays it in a very strange way that is pretty much unusable. So the same thing would happen if we set it to any type of texturing. It's just not going to know how to display it. But if we set it back to advanced, give it a little bit to process, it'll be like, okay, I'm a game engine again, and it'll kind of be on its merry way, displaying things as it should. So one of the next things that we need to get this to kind of all work right is some type of an environment. And we really haven't went over environments at all. We really haven't had a need to. But again, this is PBR, physically based rendering. That means that it needs some type of environment for it to be kind of mathematically sitting in. Because again, for it to be mathematically accurate, it needs to be an object that is sitting in a place. It can't just be an object that is sitting in a void of nothing, because in the real world, nothing kind of doesn't exist. Maybe if you were in a black hole, I don't know. But with these environments, if I scroll down here, we're still on the shading tree. I have this little environment here, and right here is this little image that's just Japan_subway2 final. So if I hit the F6 key, that's going to bring up all my presets. And right here I have environments, indoor, outdoor, and when I see any of these, I can see that this one is an interior probe 1. So if I look at that image, it's kind of a HDR or a 3D image of a room. So kind of what this does, if I jump to my render tree and one of these is in here, I can just look around, and not only can I see the thing that I'm rendering, but the lighting that is happening on this object is actually being created from the environment, or the pseudo fake environment that it's setting in. So you can kind of just think of this background image. This is just kind of the subtle lighting that's happening in the scene. And I can also, like this right here, I have this directional light that if I turn this off, the lighting in the scene is still kind of getting affected by the scenario. So let's go back to the modeling tab, items. So directional lights off, directional lights on. So again, there's just kind of multiple things happening. But with the directional light off, if I look, these metal things are still reflecting something, and that something that they are reflecting is technically this subway environment. So again, to get these environments in the scene, if you have the Modo content installed, you can hit F6, go to environments, choose indoor, outdoor, pick any environment that you want. You just double click it, and then it'll add that environment to the scene. If you don't have the Modo content installed, in another video I'll go over how to drop in an environment for you. So let's turn this directional light back on just so this is a little bit more well lit. So the last thing that we kind of need in this scenario, and I've mentioned it a bunch of times already, is all these things over here, these textures are set to Unity and then whatever texture I want. So kind of how all this works is right here, we have this guy is our normal material. So if I was to grab a set of polygons on this, hit M, call this whatever I wanted, this is just a normal material in the scene. But technically what's happening here is right above it is this little guy right here called Unity material. And what this is doing, since it's over top of this material, is it's kind of almost overriding this material and saying, hey, I'm more important, so show me first. So same thing in Photoshop, if you have a layer that's filled with red over top of any amount of layers, that layer filled with red is going to be what's shown because it's kind of on top of the stack. So we get this little Unity material in here, and then all of these are just images, and then we set them to a Unity and then diffuse, Unity albedo, Unity normal map, Unity metallic, etc. until we have all of our textures applied. So in order to get this little guy here, I mean realistically, if I was going to remake this material, I can just add this and call it chest O2, hit OK. Now it has this new material on it. So over here, I can realistically, I want to put one of these Unity materials over top of my kind of standard material. So I'm going to hit Add Layer, go into Custom Materials, and hit Unity Material. And if I wanted to work in the Unreal Engine, I would choose the Unreal material. Let's grab the Unity one for now. That gets thrown into the scene, and you can see that everything kind of changes a little bit. So from here, we would just drag and drop textures like normal. So this, let's just grab this albedo. When this got thrown into the scene, technically what would happen is it would be a, well, I guess it'd be a basic diffuse amount. So ideally, we have a diffuse amount over top of a Unity material. They don't know how to interact with each other, so it just displays as white. So this diffuse amount, we would click, go down to Unity, and then say Unity albedo. Click that, and then it would show up, and we would do that for all these textures, and it would just be import your list of textures, and then it would be Unity, smoothness, normal, metallic, emission, all the way down. Again, we went over pretty much all these. So albedo, we know what that is. It's the color map. Ambient occlusion, we know how to make those. A bump map is a little bit like a normal map, but it's going to be black and white, whereas a normal map is red, green, and blue. It's mostly a blue texture, but again, we'll explain that a little bit more later. So a bump map is kind of similar, but it's going to be a black and white image where white equals bumped out, black equals kind of pushed in, and 50% gray equals nothing is happening. Detail albedo, we went over that. Detail mask, detail normal, emission. Emission would be a new one. That would be what's glowing or not. So let's say that you had these little things, instead of them being rivets, they were LED lights. You would set that to an emission map, have your emission map be completely black, and then all these little areas that you wanted to glow would be set to white. Metallic, we know what that is now. Normal map, we're going to go over in a bit. But again, that's just making it look like there's more geometry than is actually there, more detail than is actually there. And then unity smoothness is going to be that kind of the shininess map. So one more little note about this whole scenario is about this smoothness map. So this one is a unity smoothness, and then you'll also hear the word gloss, G-L-O-S-S. So smoothness and a gloss map, you can think of those as the exact same thing. There's really no difference between the two. It's just some people call it smoothness, some people call it gloss. It's just gloss is usually easier, quicker to write than smoothness. I mean, obviously you can see smoothness has a lot of letters in it. It's a long word. So kind of the flip side of that would be roughness. So unity uses a smoothness map. So let's go ahead and let's just undo all of this scenario stuff that I did and get back to our original crate. There we go. So let's grab our unity smoothness, set this to a unity albedo so we can see this. So Unity is a game engine that uses a smoothness map. A smoothness or a gloss map is a black and white map where, again, white equals shiny or glossy, black equals not shiny or glossy. On the flip side, so going down to our custom materials, there's Unreal. So probably more of you have heard of the Unreal Engine. A bunch of games use it. So like pretty much everything that Epic makes is in Unreal. Unreal Tournament, Gears of War, just a bunch of stuff is made in Unreal. But the Unreal Engine, instead of using a smoothness map like this guy, Unreal uses what's called a roughness map. And a roughness map is kind of the exact opposite of a smoothness map, where Unity uses a smoothness map. So again, white equals smooth, black equals not smooth. A roughness map is white equals rough or not smooth, and black equals not rough or smooth. So again, if you need to, this is kind of a general rule of thumb, sometimes some things change, but if you need to jump from Unity to Unreal and say, okay, I did have a smoothness map, this guy, now I need a roughness map, you can just take this black and white image in Photoshop, hit Control-I, that turns the blacks to whites and the whites to blacks. It just inverts the image, and then you would apply that in your game engine. So again, Unity uses gloss map or smoothness map. Unreal uses a roughness map. So let's set this back to a smoothness, and we're back to having our normal asset. So the other thing I want to note real quick is if I was to render this out, I hit my little render button, it's going to display this background image or whatever my environment image is. But when I actually render this out, so if I hit render, and I'm going to make a render sheet that has this little chest in it, let's actually abort this render and actually get kind of a good view of this. So render. It'll take a little bit to render, and you might hear my fans kick on while it's doing this process. Again, I have all the default settings, so again, this isn't going to be a very spectacular render. It's just going to render kind of quick. There we go. So it's not actually going to save this background out as long as you kind of have your default settings. So I know I've went over this before, but your final color output, that would be this guy right here. And then your alpha output is this guy right here. This is saying, what do you want the empty pixels, the non-geometry pixels to be? So if I do alpha color, change this to alpha output. white equals there's geometry here, black equals there's nothing there. So if I go to save this image, let's go ahead and save it as a JPEG. So a JPEG can't have any empty pixels. Oh, where's JPEG even at? Maybe it doesn't give me that option. Okay, doesn't matter. I'll save it just as a PNG. So chest render.png, save that on the desktop, and let's open that up real quick inside of Photoshop after it saves, of course. So dragging that right in Photoshop. Since we had this alpha output, it should be in there by default, but since it was turned on, it kind of layers this image on top of this image, and it says black equals no pixels. So when I open this in Photoshop, again, you probably are familiar with this, the background is no longer in there. So just because I can see my train image in the background, that doesn't mean it's actually going to render out when I save it in Photoshop. So I know that was kind of a lot to take in. There's a lot of stuff going on, but realistically, I introduce you to two new maps. So one of them being, a metal map, and the other being a gloss or smoothness map. All these other ones, these detail ones, you don't need to worry about. The mask ones, since you're not using detail masks, you don't really need to worry about. So let's just delete those out, pretend like they don't exist. So again, we have our gloss or smoothness, ambient occlusion, we know how to make that. Unity, the metallic, we know how to make that effectively. Again, the metallic and the smoothness are both just black and white maps that you make separately, how you would make a normal set of textures. But again, it's just going to be black and white, where in the smoothness, white equals shiny, black equals not shiny. In the metallic, white equals metal, black equals not metal. Normal map, we're going to learn about those a little bit more in the future. And then the albedo, realistically, is kind of just the diffuse map, but without any of the lighting painted in. And kind of the last thing we learned was how to put all this stuff and make it all visible by using a Unity material. We set this to advanced, and then we have some type of environment image in there. And again, even if I turn this environment image just completely off, overall everything still realistically works. There's a subtle environment in there that's just kind of this gradient of black to white as opposed to it being an image, but just your reflections aren't going to be as unique, I guess you could say. So again, this is with it on. So again, kind of a lot to take in, but just kind of know smoothness, and then your metal maps are just black and white maps that you create kind of like you create a diffuse, and then you apply them as separate textures. So you have a combination of textures applied all to the same set of geometry with the same set of UVs. So again, looking at the UVs in this, there's not really anything unique about this at all. It's just pretty much a crate is a box. So this is kind of one side of the box, the other side, and then top, front, bottom, back. And then these little things would just be all the little locks and whatnot. So again, maps wise, it's just a set of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 maps total, all using the same UVs to make an image that uses this PBR workflow.